If you're like me, you love analog photography. I recently picked up this lovely Rolleiflex clone from China called the Seagull. But I also have 35mm cameras. I used to use a Epson V600 to scan my negatives and later a Sony 90mm macro lens, but since I left the company that provided me with those, I no longer have access to them. So I looked for an alternative way to scan my negatives, but I first tried the lab that I use that also develops my rolls, but they're way too expensive. They're like, for scanning, it's like 10 euros a roll, and those pictures are only like 3.5 megapixels JPEG, and I don't think that's the standard you should go for when scanning medium format negatives. So I looked for an alternative way to scan my negatives, so I invested 30 euros in some macro rings instead, since I already have a great camera, the one that's filming me right now. That's a Sony Alpha 7 IV with a 33 megapixel sensor. I already have lenses for that, the 28mm and the 50. Why not use them? But there are so many different combinations. For example, for 35mm negatives, I could use the 50mm, I could use the 28, I could use 10mm macro rings, I could use the 16mm macro ring, I could combine those, get 26mm macro ring. Which one's the best? So I conducted this experiment. And I have to say, the results, they're only valid for the exact two lenses that I own. Those being the 28mm FE f2 and the Sony 50mm FE f1.8. If you have different lenses, they will or will not, they might produce different results. So here's the setup. To rule out any lens distortions that analog lenses might have, I won't be scanning negatives today, but I will be photographing graph paper. Those squares are exactly 1mm apart. In this video, I'll be focusing on the most common formats, those being 135 or 35mm, 645, 6x6 and 6x7. But before we conduct the experiment, I wanted to find out at which aperture I should shoot these at. And so I tested f2 to f22, and I found out that f8 is the best, giving you the best sharpness. Going any higher in aperture just decreases the shutter time. Okay, then let's start with 135 and then work our way up to larger formats. Here are all the possible combinations for the 135 format. I will not only compare image quality, but I will also compare the equivalent megapixels that you would get, because not every lens and macro ring will fill out the negative area completely, so you have to crop in, and I will tell you those. Using the Sony 20mm with a 10mm macro tube, you would get an image that's around 8.8 megapixels, has some sharp corners, but fringing. For the 28mm with the 16mm macro tubes, you get an image that's around 19 megapixels, has soft corners and some fringing. For the 50mm with the 10mm macro lens, you get a 4 megapixel image, which has sharp corners and no fringing, but it's only 4 megapixels. For the 50mm and the 16mm macro tubes, you get an image that's around 7 megapixels, has sharp corners and no fringing. That's my recommendation. With the 50mm lens using 26mm macro tubes, you get an image that's around 14 megapixels, has soft corners and no fringing. And here's a real-world example. The image on the left is my recommendation of a 50mm lens with the 16mm tube, and on the right is the 28mm with the 16mm tubes. Comparing the corners, especially the pawn and the knight, you can see a big difference in the fringing or chromatic aberration. And here's the same negative scanned on an Epson V600. Now, to conclude 135, my recommendation: go for the 50mm lens with the 16mm tube. This will get you the perfect balance of image quality, corner sharpness and chromatic aberration, or the lack of. Okay, now let's jump to medium format, and I'm going to skip the boring ones and get to the one that I recommend. It's using the 50mm with the 16mm macro tube, resulting in a 23 megapixel image, sharp corners and low fringing. I hope this video brought you new information, and if it didn't, at least I hope it was entertaining.